Hello and welcome to our first instalment of In Conversation With. Today I have the real pleasure of speaking with Charlie Ewels, Bath rugby captain, England International and former Bryanston OB. Welcome, Charlie.
Hey, sir, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to chat. And like you said, fond memories of our time in Connaught together.
So that was, I thought it was sort of 4 or 5 years ago, but it wasn't. You left in 2013.
2013, yeah. So what's that now? Coming up 8 years.
Yeah,
that's getting old.
Do you often think about Branston?
I think about those times in my life. They were good fun. I'm still in touch with guys that I was at the school with, and obviously this year I haven't been able to see too many of anyone really. But the times that we do catch up, we reminisce of the stories of those days and things that happened, things we got up to. So yeah, no, fond memories. Do think about those times.
They were, you guys certainly were a handful. Do you remember much about that group in Connaught?
Yeah, so we had quite a strong rugby contingent in that house. So just when I was at the school in Connaught, year above me was Ollie Devoto, who's obviously now down at Exeter Chiefs. In my year was Tom Wollstonecroft, who's at Saracens now, and then in the year below me was Rory Jennings, and then just down the hill, I can't remember his Dorset, but Max Clark was also at the school at the same time. So we had a real group. We had a real group at the time that have obviously gone on and sort of stayed in the game and are playing at the top level now. So yeah, we had some fun.
Yeah, well, Clarky was in Portman.
Portman, that's it.
But that must be quite weird to look back and think that there are 4 of you in the same boarding house who've gone on to play professional rugby, and actually even more weird when you've been sat in a full England dressing room with Ollie Devoto. Were you aware of it when you were here, that those the caliber of players you were with?
No, I don't think so. I knew they were good. I think at the time, we were all like, for what it's worth, we were all playing sort of like age group England, and we had sort of representative games that we were playing then, and we were all involved with the Bath Academy. But no, I mean, it would have been, I probably wouldn't have believed you if you'd have said in whatever it would have been 6-7 years time, you'll be sat with Devo and we just played a test match together. So that's always pretty cool.
Fantastic. So we put out messages on sort of school social media platforms, and a few of our pupils have sent in questions as well. In fact, some have been recorded. Over the next sort of half an hour or so, I'd love to ask you some questions about both your time at Bryanston, about rugby, about the transition. And so we'll start probably with the first question, which came in from Tom Owens, who asked how you found your transition from your old school, because you joined us from Bournemouth School. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. It was a shock at the time. I remember being hugely excited. It all, in terms of actually coming to the school, it all happened quite quickly. It was, I was sort of, I was doing my GCSEs at Bournemouth School, and then I'd gone for a sports scholarship at a couple of schools, and then it was basically, I think I was off on a rugby camp that weekend, and it was basically like I came home from school, and my mum basically said to me like, "Oh look, you've had an offer from Bryanston. You need to kind of decide. We need to let them know before the weekend." If you want to go or not. So I had about literally half an hour I was packing my bags to go, and it was one of those where I was just like, it's one of those opportunities that I'll look back and kick myself if I don't say yes. Like I've got to jump at this and got to take it. So yeah, I remember being hugely excited to join the school, and then things were different. Like I've never boarded before in my life. I've been at an all boys school since year 7. I was mixed primary school, and I've been at an all boys school for the last 5 years, which is obviously different to having girls around. And then like never been at a public school before. So there's all these things that were different, but again, like I say, at the same time, it was hugely exciting. And I remember just being like, wow, the facilities in this place and everything that's on offer, like this is amazing. Like I'll kick myself if I don't make the most of this now, and I don't tear in, and if I just sort of sit back and hold off. So
I'm just going to go across and pick one of the questions that goes from our sports scholars, Aoife.
What was the best thing about Bryanston School?
I think the food. I remember the food being excellent, and honestly, just like living those, obviously for me, it was being 16, 17, like living those years, like boarding with your mates, having a laugh. And then also just at the same time as all of that, just having, like I said at the start, like these just unbelievable facilities and like an unbelievable opportunity to kick on, and like with everything. Like it wasn't like oh, this is just academic, this isn't just sport, this isn't just, it gives you a bit of balance and variety, and like you're there 24 hours a day, so you can't complain that you haven't got the time in the day. And that's probably from where I'd come from before, where I'd been at school from 8 till 3. The school was academic, and then if you stayed after school to do sports, you just did that. Whereas, in a day at Branston, you could be up, you might have an assembly, then you're into lessons and it's academic for a bit, and then you've got sport in the middle of the day, you're back into lessons, you're jumping around, you're hanging out with your mates for a bit as well. So you just get that nice balance and that nice variety, so that nothing's too full on all the time at any one time.
Yeah. So you've also picked up on one of the things that the kids always feed back when we ask them about the best things about Branston. These are current kids as well, which is the food, the sort of dining hall. And then I think we had another question, which was from Esme.
You may remember the amazing food that Mike Thorne and his team produced. What does your daily nutrition look like now, and how has that differed to what it was like when you were at school?
Yeah, I don't have morning tea. If I don't know, that's still a thing. Like that's something that had to get sacrificed, but not a million miles away. Like we obviously eat around how we're training, so we eat more on or if we're preparing for a game, for example, obviously our food comes right up, particularly our carbs and stuff. And then around training, if it's a light session, then the way that we eat would be reflected in that, and vice versa. If we've got a big session, you would need to fuel for that session. So yeah, food it's probably one of the areas, even in like my time in the game, that nutrition's always been important, but the emphasis that's been put on it, I feel, as I've sort of probably come through, is becoming more and more. And like the way that the food that's provided for us at Farley, where we train, is world class. Like everything we're eating is like locally sourced, and it's all, like I say, everything is tailored towards the session that's either just been, or the session that's coming up, or the next day, or all of those things in mind. So yeah, food is an enormous part of your recovery, of your preparation, of your day-to-day. And I think the thing with food is it's probably the only thing that we have that every single decision we make around our food is affecting our job and what we do. Other things around like how we train and stuff, obviously it's very much like we're on or we're off. Like we're either, if you're training, and if you're not, you're not. But with food, every decision you're making all through the day, they're always affecting, like I say, whether you're preparing or recovering from a session or a game, whatever it might be, all of those things.
You mentioned Farley there, and it is a quite an impressive setup. And actually, we've got a question here from Matilda. So let's have a look at that.
What were the training facilities like when you were at Bryanston?
From what I've heard, they've drastically improved since we were there. So the pitch was always brilliant. The first team pitch was always, for a grass pitch that's at the bottom of a hill, it was surprisingly not boggy, and was always, so yeah, credit to the ground staff. I don't know how they kept the pitch like that. So from that point of view, it was always great. The gym was a bit different. I don't think it is like this now from chats that we've had since, but we had a probably 4 meter by 8 meter carpeted room with 1 squat rack, 1 bench, and a couple of dumbbells in it. So yeah, those were, to be honest, that's all we needed at the time. Like you just find a way to adapt, and you find a way to train with the equipment that you've got. And we used to have, like I say, probably that group of us that I mentioned before, like we used to go and train together, and actually that would be something that we'd look forward to and go and enjoy, whether that was in the evenings or on the days off or whatever. And we were provided with programs at that time, but yeah, that was something that we sort of got our teeth stuck into and used to look forward to. But no, they weren't there from the gym side of things. They weren't the greatest facilities.
So what was the experience like going out onto the first team pitch then?
No, it's like, it's awesome because it's like like I've got brilliant friends that I've made playing professional rugby as well. But the group and the nature of it with contracts and player turnover and all these sort of things, like guys come and guys go, there's always going to be like the core of the squad will remain largely the same, but guys will come in and out. And I say that's the nature of professional sport. But when you play at school, like the lads that are there, that's it. Like no one's going to join the team, no one's going to leave the team. Like the team is the team. So for that year, and obviously then each year your year groups move on, but for that year, they're like your mates, that team, like that's all you've got. So you've got to find a way. Like there isn't an external answer. There isn't someone that's going to come in and potentially plug that hole that you might have in the team or whatever. And so like you look forward to. I remember like all week if we had a big game at the weekend, that would be the chatter. Like that would be you'd be in lessons and you'd just be talking about that, and you got to run around with your mates at the weekend. Like, how good! Yeah.
Well, one of your mates, Tom Wollstonecroft, got in touch, and his question was your first game for the first 15?
No, it was for the second 15. So I had broken I dislocated and broke my wrist just before I came to the school. So I missed the first few games with the first team played, and then I don't know whether it was a test to see if I was fit enough or whatever, just to get me into playing for the school. So it was Blundell's away. So my first game actually came in the second team.
Good old Tom. I remember that first term, and I remember midway through that term, we were sat in my office and we were chatting about rugby, and you'd just come back from injury, and there was huge expectations around you. And Ollie Devoto was struggling at that time. He'd had a shoulder injury. I think he dislocated his shoulder during the summer. And how do you sort of process that when you're at school and you've got these aspirations of playing rugby, and think you're having to take on board that you're not getting a chance, that you're not being able to play your best? Do you remember sitting down having those sort of conversations?
I do, yeah. And I think even now I struggle with injury because you can't do the thing that you love doing and that you're desperate to do. I think with a bit more experience though, you realize things that are in your control and out of your control. And something like being injured, like your rehab is within your control. So how hard you work on your rehab and do all of those things, but the speed in which your body heals and the things that you may miss being injured are not worth spending energy on and not worth. And like you say, at the time, I probably didn't, or I definitely didn't appreciate that. Like you say, I had all this sort of pent up frustration that I'd come to a new school to play rugby, and I wasn't doing that. I wasn't playing rugby. So but again, that was probably, I think you need to go through that, and that's part of your growth, isn't it? So like you need to go through those frustrations, and then it's on reflection when you look back, you went, why did I waste all that energy on, like I say, something that I have no control over? Yeah.
I think we do offer a lot more now, certainly in terms of looking after scholars. And I'm just going to dial in one of the other questions which came from Spencer.
Hi, Charlie. At Branston, we have the Performance Sports Programme, which looks after ATL kids, including sports scholars. Were there any programs that supported you when you were at Bryanston?
Not specifically. I mean, there was obviously the rugby program was the rugby program, but there was nothing sort of specific for the sports scholars. We had support that came from the club, so we were sort of linked with the Bath Academy at the time. So we'd have, like I said before, we had a little bit of like S&C support around gym programs, or if we needed physio support or whatever it might be, there was limited access to that. But no, nothing to the level of sort of a full individualized program. It was more just you were left to crack on, and you jumped into the rugby program and you threw yourself into everything else with the school.
I always felt there's it must have been quite sort of difficult for you guys, because all the boys you mentioned, including yourself, were actually all bright boys. All of them have at least one, some two, some 3A grades at A level. And I was worried about the sort of amount of work that you had to do. And one of our current sports scholars, Tom, has asked a similar question.
How are you able to manage the schoolwork and the rugby life without it all becoming too overwhelming? And did it affect your sleep?
I've definitely got enough sleep. I think it comes back to, I sort of spoke at the start around what did I love about, or what do I think the best thing about Bryanston, and I spoke about that balance. Life's all about balance, isn't it? And you'll find that if you dedicate quality time to whatever it is that you're doing, and like obviously for me that was my sport with my rugby and then my studies, so I dedicated my time to those two things, and then it was socializing with my mates. So if you waste a lot of time, and if you I don't know, I can speak for myself here. If I was studying, if I sat and just stared at a book for 3 hours, the quality of what I was going to do there was poor. Like I was going to get fatigued, my mind was going to drift, I wasn't going to do work. Whereas if I went, I think we had our preps, well, they were an hour and a half, weren't they, both preps? So I knew that actually if I went, or if say first prep was like 45, 50 minutes, so I knew actually I was better off just doing first prep, studying, and then knowing that I've got to go 50 minutes here, so I'm going to use this time, quality time, and then in the second prep we would go in gym, or we would go do something, because again, like the way that I was and the way that my brain worked, like an hour and a half of just looking at the book, I probably wouldn't have done any more than I just did in that first prep. So as long as I was getting my work done, and then if I wasn't getting my work done, it probably wasn't that I was dedicating enough time to it. It was just that the time I was spending doing it wasn't good enough. So yeah, I think like I say, you're there for 24 hours a day. You're gonna sleep. You're never, like, if you're sacrificing sleep, then don't, because if you're not sleeping, then you're going to be tired, and actually then you're going to end up in this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, which goes down and down and down, and nothing you're going to do is going to be of any quality. But there's always enough time in the day, and then when you're struggling with stuff, and then again, whether that was anything from, like we spoke about, even if I was mentally struggling with something, frustrations, there's always someone there that could help. Like prep time, I can't tell you how valuable it is, like say, having come from a non-boarding school, how valuable it is to be able to ask the teacher a question at 8 o'clock at night is something that, like I say, now I look back and I go, I was still like learning at that time, and like I wasn't just staring at the book and not getting it. I could literally walk, like for maths, for example, I think it was Tuesday nights, Mr. Melbourne was on duty in Connaught, and he was my maths teacher. So I'd always save my maths work for Tuesdays, and I could literally sit there, and if something I didn't get, I didn't waste a minute on it. I just walked downstairs, and there he was, and I could continue with that. So I think that would be my answer to it. So no, I never found it OTT, and if I did, it wasn't because it was because I was wasting time. I'd be watching a film or doing too much socializing or doing too much of that stuff. It wasn't because I didn't have the time in the day.
And Tom Ellis was one of the people who sent in a question, which was to ask what you wrote in your Leavers book.
I can't say that. Do you know what I wrote?
I do know what you wrote in your Leavers book. I thought it was awesome, to be honest. And so maybe that'll be one for another day. I mean, it's a bit of a funny question from Tom Ellis, and I was pleasantly surprised when that came through, because I remember Tom as a 12-year-old at Millfield Prep, and I think he was captain of Millfield Prep, and I was refereeing at the Port Regis Sevens, and he was a grumpy old so and so then, age 12, and he didn't look as though he had a sense of humour, and he would sort of question everything you would say. Oh, what's that for, sir? Why is that, sir? It's a penalty, sir. So I'm delighted to hear that he's got a bit of a funny side to him, and he's one of your mates.
No, yeah, he has. He's lightened up. He's very recently just had a little one. So what is it now? I think little baby Isabella Ellis is about 4 or 5 days old now. So yeah, he's got his hands full at the moment. Every time I see him, he's got big bags under his eyes, and he slept for about 3 hours. So because
I suppose that's not a side of sort of professional sport that people realise, the sort of human side that you have your own private lives, that you have a personality beyond what you see on the pitch. How do you contend with sort of fans, supporters, and people who don't sort of see that sort of side of you?
I think the game's got better at showing more of that side. So I think, again, now if you look particularly in, like, say, the England team at the moment, there's guys there, and this is probably the power of social. This is social media for the good, and this is where these things can come through. There's guys there that you would know about what they get to up off the pitch and what sort of people they are, like your Ellis Genges, Carl Sinklers. I'm trying to think who else is sort of good at that, sort of they're pushing their personality out there as well. Like Johnny May, I feel like a lot more people understand what he's like. Henry Slade. There's these guys now that you say, like, we're rugby players, but first and foremost we're people, and whether that be husbands, dads, boyfriends, sons, whatever it might be. So I think that's massively important, because also when you've got a bit of context on that stuff, then you can start to understand why people do things, and actually what drives them, and that it's not just these sort of rugby robots that just go out there every week and either play well or play badly, win or lose. It's people out there, and obviously people are far more complex than that, and there's all the other stuff that's going on, and that's why getting all of those people, making them feel valued, getting them all together and aligned on the same thing is that's why winning's hard. Winning consistently is a difficult thing to do.
So your rugby journey sort of began at club rugby, and I've seen some of the clips that Bath have put out about you going back to sort of Bournemouth, and it's lovely to see that. And then we recall you playing here, but I felt the next stage of your journey from Bryanston wasn't just the Bath Academy contracts, because some make it, most don't. But the next major highlight for me was the Under-20s World Cup, and you were one of only 2 or 3 boys who played both in the 2014 and 2015 World Cup.
Yeah,
I mean that's quite some achievement. And do you remember who your second row partner was in the 2014 World Cup?
This unknown guy, Maro Toje. Don't know what he's up to now. Yeah,
I think he's done all right. He plays a bit of rugby, I think.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of players for both sides. That World Cup final was against South Africa, and people like Jesse Creel were playing. These people are now World Cup winners. Were you aware when you were 19, 20 years old playing that these are future stars? You're surrounded by future stars. That's who you're in the mix with.
No, I don't think it comes back to that. It comes back to that, like the human thing again. Like, yeah, you want to push and be in that team, but also like we had a great group of lads in both those years. Like I had such a good time going to the World Cup. We spent a month in New Zealand in 2014 for that World Cup, and then in 2015 we spent a month in Italy, having also just spent the Six Nations together again as well. So no, you're again, when you're in it, you're pushing, you want to be better, you want to win, you're training hard, you're competing, you're doing all of those things, but you're also just having a really good time. And I think at that age as well, you're back to your clubs when you're not with the 20s. So you've got this group of you that are all 18, 19, 20 years old. And in that environment, you get your opportunity to play, to start, to lead, to have your say on how you want to play the game and be involved in this program. And then you go back to your club again, and you almost get this reminder of like, well, in men's rugby, I'm back down here again, because I go back to the club and there's Dave Atwood, he's off playing for England when I'm not there, and there's George Ford at 10, and there's Carl Ferns and Sam Burgess and Leroy Houston in the back row, and Dave Wilson and Paul James in the front row, and Rob Webber. And I feel so like I train with these guys, I push these guys, I compete with these guys, but like the level that those boys are at, like that's where I want to get to. So at the time, you're obviously like, I'm hungry and I want that to be me one day. But you've almost got this constant reminder to say, like, you go play for the 20s, you get to practice those things, then you're back to the club, and you almost have this reminder of But this is what some of the best in the world look like, and this is how they train. This is how they compete.
So you mentioned all the other boys, four of you who are in Connaught, just in one boarding house, who then all had these Bath Academy contracts. And I remember having a huge amount of pride, but also just so pleased for you guys when we see you on television. I don't know if you remember, we once brought a minibus over just to watch you play in an A-League game, and it was the boys in the boarding house. So these people, some of them weren't even into rugby, just said we want to go and watch Wolfie and Charlie play. And that was. Do you remember we came over and watched that?
I do, yeah. It was my first ever game of men's rugby. It was Bath United, which is the Bath second team against the Navy. And I remember being obviously so nervous, but then to know that, like you say, there was lads on that minibus, there was lads that came on that trip who had zero interest in rugby, never picked up a ball in their life, never came to watch a game, no interest, boring, just want to go and do other stuff, into football, whatever. But they, like you say, they just wanted to come along because we had a good little group. We had a good little group of misfits in that year and in that boarding house. And it was, this is what those guys are up to. We want to go and support them in the same way that, if those guys were in a play or whatever it might have been, wasn't particularly my cup of tea before I joined the school, and then next minute I'm sat front row cheering them on because I want them to do well. So that stuff like that's pretty special. Yeah,
but you also turn up in some of those plays as well. Do you remember what you were in the A3 festival?
I do, yeah. I played Treebeard in Lord of the Rings, and I carried the hobbits to Isengard. So I can't remember. I remember turning up at the school and being told about this A3 festival and being told that you got to be in a play and got to do this sort of stuff, and it just blew my mind. That had never crossed my mind as something that I was going to be into. And then, like you say, next minute, a few weeks, months later, there I am at rehearsals with twigs all strapped around me, dressed as a tree, absolutely loving it. So.
It's amongst the stories I always tell when people ask me to define sort of Bryanston, and it's that, I had Charlie Ewels here, and he was a talking tree, and the lead in those plays wanted to get on a minibus and go and watch Charlie play rugby, and I always feel that's what sort of captures the sort of essence of Bryanston. I always felt that you I was pleased with how you sort of warmed to it, how you personally got stuck into things.